have to note that today is Leap Day, so this is a truly extraordinary occasion. We are very delighted to be here tonight in the heart of Napa Valley to honor the careers and celebrate the acquisition of the archive of Dorothy Gaiter and John Brecher, whose writing has profoundly influenced the way millions of Americans think about, talk about, and appreciate wine. As the chief wine critic for the San Francisco Chronicle put it, when their Wall Street Journal wine column Tastings ended its 12-year run, Dottie and John found just the right tone to discuss wine in a straight-back publication like the Journal, down to a rating scale that ranged from yuck to delicious. The couple approached wine as critics, but more importantly, as wine lovers, who, he writes, were able to educate readers about grower champagnes one week and report on the wine offerings at Disney World the next. He concludes, there is no doubt that their presence will remain in the world of wine and will all be the better for it. That prediction has held up true over the past 10 years as well, and that is why we are so honored that Dorothy and John chose the UC Davis Library to be the home for this wonderful collection of materials that tell the story of their 20-plus years as wine writers. From the book given to them by John's brother in 1973 that launched them on their exploration of wines together, through the years of writing tastings, as well as 4 wine books together. And I can report that, yes, there is life after the Wall Street Journal. Dorothy and John continue to write about wine for the Grape Collective and other publications. So while we're here to celebrate their achievements this evening, this is by no means the end of their story. One thing you may not know about Dorothy and John, if you discovered them through wine, as I did, is that by the time they became wine writers, they'd both worked for more than 2 decades as highly accomplished hard news journalists. Dorothy had received 2 Pulitzer Prize nominations for her reporting on race and urban issues for the Wall Street Journal. And John had been the journal's page 1 editor for more than a decade. Meanwhile, they kept tasting notes for 25 years in their personal life. So, when they were asked to write a column on wine for the journal's new weekend section, their personal and professional interests converged. Their writing quickly became beloved by readers around the country because it was fun, informative, and inclusive. There was something in their writing for everyone, from the novice to the connoisseur. As the column took off, they eventually wisely decided to dedicate their professional lives to wine writing. Which brings us to this evening. Dorothy and John, it's such a privilege for the UC Davis Library to help steward your legacy by providing a home for your archive. Thank you. Before we get to the heart of tonight's program, I'd like to take a moment to share a bit about the library and the place that Dorothy and John's collection will have there. The UC Davis Library is often called the greatest wine library in the world. I take no credit for that. As UC Davis itself is one of the best wine programs in the world for learning about wine. So we collect and provide public access to the work of wine researchers, scientists, and industry leaders. We collect data relevant to the science of grape growing and winemaking, and more. And wine writers are a critical piece of the puzzle because their unique role in recording, shaping, and really bringing the evolution of the wine industry and our cultural appreciation for wine. It's not an exaggeration to say that wine writers make the wine almost as much as the winemaker as far as the public's appreciation of it goes. The famous vintner and philanthropist Warren Winiarski, whom I'm sure many of you know, is here with us tonight and shares our understanding of the important role of wine writing. It's largely thanks to his generous gift for the growth of the library's wine writer collection that we were able to bring Dorothy and John's archive to Davis and help cement their legacy. Thank you, Warren, for your support and your partnership as we continue to develop this fantastic work. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Karen MacNeil, who will lead the conversation with Dorothy and John tonight. Karen is herself an award-winning wine writer. She's the author of the best-selling Wine Bible, for which she's working on a 3rd edition, and the creator and editor of the online newsletter, Weinstein. I'm so pleased to share that Karen has also recently agreed to donate her own archive to the UC Davis Library. Thank you. There will be an opportunity for some questions and answers after the conversation, so please hold your questions until the end. And now, without further ado, Karen, away.
Thank you so much, and we're so happy that you are all here. Thank you. Tonight we're going to talk about wine journalism. We're going to talk about your Wall Street Journal column, Dorothy and John. We're going to talk about your news backgrounds, the event you created, Open That Bottle Night, and so on. But we're going to start with romance. It's a good place to start. So, your first date. Really? You drank Andre Cold Duck?
We did. We did indeed.
The whole bottle, or
The whole bottle.
Okay.
And it was delicious.
Yeah. Maybe we should explain. I mean, looking out at the audience, I know a lot of us do know what Andre Cold Duck is and was, but there may be some younger people who don't know. Which of us, as good journalists, should? John, you explain what Andre Cold Duck is.
Well, when both of us grew up in a time when our families didn't have wine at the table, we really didn't know anything about wine. So when we were in college, Dottie had the classic Boone's Farm strawberry wine. When I had an important date, I would bring a bottle of Mateus.
Oh.
But when I had a really important date, I would bring a bottle of Lancers. Right?
Yeah.
And when it came to my future wife, it was Andre Cold Duck. It was a sweet, red, sparkling wine that was really a big deal in its time.
Totally.
And it was something that definitely affected our life in wine because we knew there had to be something better out there.
Yeah. But you know, but wine is, I mean, we'll get to criticism and all that later, but wine really is romantic, isn't it?
Oh, totally. Totally. It just speaks to all of your senses. And we had spent that afternoon in a U-pick field. I don't know if you all know what that is, but we picked our own vegetables, and just fresh off the vines, we came back to John's apartment and cooked our first meal together. And
Yeah. They were cooking vegetables.
Yeah, we were. So Cold Duck wasn't a great match. You know, it wasn't a great pairing, but we were.
Yes, you were.
We were, and just drinking this wine with John. The wine had been gifted to him by his parents for his first apartment. I just fell in love with him.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
reportedly, it was sort of love at first sight.
It was, but also every bottle.
Just icing on the cake after icing on the cake after icing on the cake. Okay. Well, you know, but I worked in the USA Today newsroom in the early 80s, and I never think of newsrooms exactly as a kind of fall in love kind of environment. But really, you were in the Miami Herald newsroom, you looked at each other and you said, this is it.
It was the first day of our first jobs out of college. He'd come from Columbia College. I'd come from the University of Missouri at Columbia. And three of us started on that day, June 4th, 1973 at 9 a.m. And I hate being late, so I was the first reporter there. And he's walked over and introduced to me. And you know, he was the most recent editor-in-chief of the great Columbia Daily Spectator, the college newspaper of all college newspapers. And here was its most recent editor. And I just threw up my arms and said, salami, salami, bologna, you know? But yeah, look at him. I mean, he's
He is very cute.
he's still alive.
And you should have seen her then. But
He'll
no,
pay for that later.
But it really did happen that way. I mean, it was like it just happened. And in fact, a newsroom may not normally be a place for romance, but the Miami Herald in the 1970s, if it wasn't a great place for romance, it was sure as heck a great place for sex.
All right, let me get to that part.
It was.
Now, what are you saying, dear?
It was a very, the whole community was like alive and exciting, and the newsroom was the same.
Now, during, okay, I was in the wrong newsroom right now. So what I love, I mean, because Dottie was sharing this with me earlier, that, during your courtship, you would get out Hugh Johnson's book and essentially kind of open it anywhere and start reading about wine. And you more or less taught yourselves together, quietly, no important people in the room, but you taught yourselves about wine. If you were learning about wine today, would you do it the same way? Do you think that was a good way?
It was a good way, but we didn't, if it weren't for the help of a great merchant, we stumbled into this great store in in Coconut Grove. And we never learned this woman's name, but we had a tiny budget. We were journalists in the 70s. We had a small budget for wine, and we told her, this is our budget for the week. And, what can you, 12 bottles. And so on the cheap end was Bull's Blood, Gaiter and Brecher from Hungary, for $3, I think, and 25 cents. And then on the high end was a no-name Bordeaux for maybe 10. And she would put together 12 bottles, and we'd come home and open Hugh's book and find where those wineries were. So we had the taste, and we had the location, the important geography, and then we read up on the history. And I think the best way to learn wine today is the same way. Find a great merchant and taste as widely as you can.
Right.
But books are great. I'm addicted to paper.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah.
It was with the wine woman of Coconut Grove was so important because we bought those 12 bottles for $72. We'd come home, we would look the bottles up in Hugh Johnson, then we'd look up American wines in Leon Adams, and they gave us a sense of place. They gave us a sense of history. And then in 1975, we already knew that we really liked this stuff. This wine is interesting from those books. And then we visited Napa Valley. And those were the days when the winemakers themselves were behind the counters. Or sometimes they were on tractors, and they got off of their tractors to greet us. And it was when we met those winemakers that we just fell hard. Because that was when we realized that when you taste a wine that's well made, when you taste a wine that is intentional, when you taste a wine that has all of those great, complex flavors and tastes, you're tasting a winemaker's soul. And that was it for us.
Yeah. Ooh, tasting a winemaker's soul. Oof. You guys are writers. Okay, good. Now, before we move on to more serious things, though, I want to, well, this is sort of a serious question because I was thinking about this earlier. When you both started professionally, And me too. You had to sort of demonstrate some expertise in wine. And here you had been teaching yourselves for, I think, 2 decades or so, but you had developed expertise. And you had to do that before any newspaper would let you, or magazine would let you write about it. Today, it seems to me that blogging has changed that. Lots of people who write about wine, even many people who admit to not knowing very much about it, but are still enthralled with it and want to write about it. But it's different. Does that dismay you? Is that good? Are you happy about that? What do you think about the idea of needing expertise before you write?
I don't know why people are taught that they have to know a lot about wine to appreciate it. Now, I think you need knowledge to write about anything.
Yeah.
Passion alone is kind of meaningless, the sound of one hand clapping. Knowledge without passion is just sad. I think you need both. And there are bloggers out there who know their stuff.
Certainly.
There are people out there who know their stuff and can't communicate it. You have any thoughts?
Well, it's kind of always been that way with journalism. I mean, I was an editor at the Wall Street Journal for many years, and there were people who were brilliant in their field. They might know derivatives incredibly, incredibly well, but you had to take them into a room and beat them to a pulp and tape their mouths shut so people wouldn't hear them screaming before you could get them to explain to you what they were talking about. But when they did, it was very, very special stuff because they understood this at a level that normal people simply didn't. It simply essentially required a translator, and that's what, as an editor, I did. The trick is to find someone with wine who, on the one hand, does have that knowledge, and on the other hand, can communicate. I think that's always been difficult.
Yeah.
That's always been difficult. It's probably difficult now as well, but it's difficult to express something like wine in a way that people can relate, because it is such a very highly personal thing.
And that was where our expertise was, and showing people that you can have a wonderful life, the life of wine. That it's a great thing to have in your life, and not to be afraid of it.
Right. But it is genuinely hard to write about wine. Because there's no language for it, right? There's no agreed upon language.
Well, I think that's the wild, wild west of it, you know. But there are rules, you know, and heaven forbid that you cross them, which we did all the time. But
we always said that we never really wrote a column about wine. We wrote a column about romance and about life and about love and about raising children and about getting by every day and about making your life a little bit better. We used wine as kind of the central theme to write about the things that were really way more important than wine itself, and we think that's why the column had as much impact as it did. Our hope was that even people who didn't think they cared about wine would read the column, since it really wasn't about wine, it was really about the important things in life, and then having read this column would say, huh, it sounds like my life might be a little bit better if I drank wine, and they would become lifetime wine lovers and wine drinkers. And we heard from lots and lots of people over the years that that's exactly what happened, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, well, thinking about this idea, though, of writing actually about, as you say, life and living and raising children and romance and getting through every day. Even when you were writing about that, with using wine as something of an excuse, in a sense, to write about these ideas, these were still not ideas that were hard news. And both of you had incredible backgrounds in journalism. You were independently news reporters and bureau chiefs and editorial page writers and page one writers and Pulitzer Prize nominees and winners. And wine is not hard news, and neither is romance and how to get through the day. Why were you attracted to that? What moved you to want to move from hard news to these kinds of subjects?
Well, if I could, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
me, since this is going to be about my wife, one of the things about our column is that when you read the columns, they seem like they must have been really easy. That's what was so hard about them, is that there was so much work behind the scenes. The back office of the column was so very difficult because we wanted to bring the same repertorial aggressiveness to the column that we brought to a page one story. It needed the same quality of reporting. It needed to be right on, it needed to be correct, and it needed to have a huge amount of reporting behind the scenes. That's how we spent a lot of our time. We never talked about this, and we never, it's not something we ever wrote about, and I'll tell you why. One time, Dottie's cousin said, "Wow, you must have the best life in the world. Any problems to it?" And we said to John Smith, "Well, to tell you the truth, there is one. Because we're drinking wine for the column every single night, we never have a chance to drink our own stuff." And John Smith leaned back. After a while, he said, "That's a real high-class problem." So we never complained again about how hard we worked on the columns. But the truth is that it required an enormous amount of reporting. And as it happens, I'm married to the world's greatest reporter. And that is what's fundamental to our column was the reporting, and that came from my wife. That's why we could come up with an idea to write a column about do's and don'ts of ordering wines on a date, and not just write things that came out of our mind, but that my wife could find a woman who would tell her the story of the time she went on a date with a guy. She ordered the wine, but of course they poured the taste for him. So they poured him a little taste, and he looks up at the sommelier and says, "I'm going to have a lot more than that."
Wrong guy.
And that's just what she said.
Yeah.
And also, when you opened that bottle night fell during Lent.
Yeah.
And we heard from readers who said that they really wanted to celebrate Open That Bottle Night, but they felt like they needed to give up wine during that time. So I called the Archdiocese of New York, and I tracked down a priest, and I said, "This is what people are saying. Is this correct?" And he said, "Well, there are other things that they could give up." Right answer. Right answer.
Okay, so we all have to know, because there are people in the room, myself too, who, it's hard to get a writing gig. It's really hard these days. So when you started writing the Wall Street Journal column in 1998, how did that happen? Did you pitch the Journal? Did you go to them and say, "Look, we know we've been doing all this new stuff, but we have this idea"?
No.
It was an accident in a sense. When the Journal started the Weekend Journal in 1998, the editor of Weekend Journal was a young woman brilliant editor named Joanne Lipman. Joanne had worked for me on Page One, and she and her husband had been over to our house any number of times where we drunk far too much wine. And so Joanne came to us in 1998 and said, in addition to your regular jobs, would you write a little wine column for us? We'd never written a word about wine. At that point, we'd been drinking and studying wine, traveling to wine regions for 35 years, but we had never written a word about wine. As it happens, everything at the Wall Street Journal moves really, really slowly. They'd been talking about doing a weekend journal for years, and we assumed that once again, it would never happen. So we said, sure! We'd be happy to write a column, Joanne. It'll never happen. And then it actually happened. Yeah. And we started writing. And
we actually did it for free for a while. Can you imagine that? Which is another reason why I guess we got the gig, right? Yeah. But we did it for free for 2 years, and then
that's a long time.
For a long
for 2
time.
years?
And then after we were doing our regular jobs, we'd been discovered by Martha Stewart by then, so the column had really, really taken off. We were writing books. We were raising our 2 wonderful daughters, Media and Zoe, and in 2000. We went to the absolutely brilliant managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, Paul Steiger, a legendary journalist and a great friend. And we told Paul, we're doing the wine thing, we're doing our regular jobs, we can't do both anymore. And Paul, being a visionary and being a genius, said, which would you rather do? And we said, wine! And that's how we became wine writers, full time.
That is a story that if you are aspiring to write about wine, rest assured will never happen again. Okay, so from a practical standpoint, how do you write about wine together? Because, I write about it too, and I know my own process, and I think of it as writing anyway, not tasting wine, certainly, but writing has a certain solitariness to it. It's a cerebral act. Usually you do it by yourself, but you guys do it together. And so I thought we have this beautiful wine from UC Davis here. This is from UC Davis's famous Oakville experimental station, perhaps one of the few experimental stations in the entire universe that is set in a piece of terroir that now is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million by virtue of its extraordinariness. So we thought we would just put it here because I'm curious, does one of you, how do you start the conversation? Who's got the pen?
John always has the pen because my wrist doesn't work so well. It never has.
You're swirling and he's writing.
Yeah, but we've been drinking wine together for 46 years. So our palates are pretty similar. There's only been one type of wine about which we disagreed vehemently, and that was Oregon Pinot Noirs. I like them, especially the early ones, but this has to do with how we were raised, I think. My mother grew up on a farm and taught us that fruits and vegetables were nature's candies, and you could have as much of them as you liked. So the early Pinot Noirs, the first generation, were fruit forward, and so those appealed to me more than they did to John. But we would evaluate the wines the way everyone does. You know,
Right.
we'd look at it, we'd smell it, we'd look for typicity. I have a better palate, I think. No, he would agree to that.
That's true.
He would agree with that. And because I'm into fruits and vegetables and food and lived overseas for a couple of years and love tasting the food of other cultures, I have a very adventurous palate, I think, and I can recall tastes. He has an amazing memory for taste as well, but also geography and labels, every label ever made. He and our older daughter, Media, they had this instant recall. Our younger daughter, Zoe, who's a professional drummer and badass, she's that way with music. She hears something once, we would taste together at the same time and tell each other what we were sensing, and John would take notes. And by the time we finished drinking a wine, if we were writing the column, it would be tasting.
Yeah,
Because we
course.
would have 6 to 10 bottles in front of us, and they'd be in brown bags. We would try to taste with food and without. And there would be some that we could dismiss on the nose alone. We were taught that at the LA County Fair, that if you're going to be tasting a lot of wines, you're going to have to find an economical way to do this. But by the time we finished the wines that were of interest to us, the column was basically written in the notes.
Right. Now, was this in your kitchen, or like where were you doing this?
In the kitchen and in the living room, wherever the kids would let us be. It was in the kitchen and the living room. We never did tastings at work. I guess at some point later, we probably could have, but since for the first 2 years we were doing our regular jobs, it just wouldn't have worked out, so it never happened. So usually what would happen, as Dottie said, is that by the time we were finished tasting 50 to 60 wines over a week, and talking about them, Dottie with her palate, me with kind of this reminds me of this thing that we had 20 years ago. The column would basically write itself because we talk about it so much. But then, getting back to the reporting issue, after all of that, to some extent, it was roughed out. We kind of had some idea what we wanted to talk about, but then it came to the reporting of, okay, we just tasted 60 Merlots under $20, and really most of them were really bad. But the truth is that these 2 or 3 wineries make a really good Merlot that's under $20. How do they do that?
Yeah.
What makes them different? And that's at the point where Dottie would call up the winemakers and say, so what do you do?
Right.
How do you do it? So it wasn't just a column of criticism, but it was also a column where hopefully you could go into the mind of a good winemaker.
And then John would call Gladys Horucci at the Wine
Institute.
They became such close friends that she sent Christmas cards. And then whoever was more passionate about the subject would start writing it. And then we'd bat it back and forth until we were both happy about it.
Yeah.
When I was 21 once, I asked him to read my unedited copy, and that was a really big mistake. Oh my goodness. But over time, I saw that the best reporters were coming to him and asking for his help with their work, and I liked their work. So over 46 years, I've leaned his way and he's leaned my way, but our styles of writing are completely different. Really, really, really different. Our younger daughter sent an Instagram of a railroad station where the caption was, "This is the way women think," and there were all these curlicues, and and then "This is the way men think," straight lines. There might have been a right angle, but and that's really sexist. But you can tell from the way this is going that I can embroider.
Yes.
And, but John will say this column will be 1,500 words, and we would wring it out. And, but it would be a back and forth and a back and forth until we were both happy with it. Then we'd print it out on paper so that we could read it, and then we'd push the button. And then try not to read it once it was published.
Yeah.
You know? You always want
Yeah.
to change something.
Yeah. Well, perhaps your most successful column was the one among many, but certainly we're all thinking about the one that was built around your idea to now the phenomenon called Open That Bottle Night. And I reread that first column. Thank you for sending it to me again. And you know, it was really moving. You talked to, you got letters rather from more than 1,000 people. They wrote very personal experiences. How did you come up with that idea? And why do you think it touched such a nerve?
The idea of Open That Bottle Night came organically. When we started writing the column, we realized that the question that we got most often, and we got it all the time, was from people who wrote to say, I have this one bottle of wine that my father gave me, or I got at an auction, or whatever. When is the perfect time to open it? And parenthetically, they would say, how much is it worth? Because people have been convinced that older wines are by their very nature worth money. So it'd be kind of like, you know something? Your 20-year-old bottle of Matus, we're sorry, but it's, you can't retire on it, you know? But we got that letter so many times, and we always said to people, look, forget what's the perfect time to open it. The perfect time to open it is this weekend. Open it, celebrate the memories, celebrate the person who gave it to you, and just enjoy. But we got that letter so often that we decided, okay, here's what we're going to do. Let's set a date, and we'll all do it together. Because even though we obviously believe that people should open up their fine bottles all the time, sometimes there are those special bottles where it takes a village to kind of say, by God, I am going to open this up. And so we set a date and said, that day we're all going to open it up, and we're going to open up our bottles. And it was amazing, and we think that the reason it had such impact was for the very reason that we created it, because everybody has that bottle. If you have 10,000 bottles in your collection or you have one bottle at home, everybody has that bottle that their grandfather left them, and you keep looking at it and you say to yourself, I really should open this, but you can't. Yeah. You can't. And this is the night to do it and celebrate your grandfather.
Yeah, yeah. And those letters, oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Like tearjerker
We
letters, right?
cried and laughed through all of them. The first follow starts with a quote from John Watson, who said, if only you had thought to create Open That Bottle Night last year, my wife of 50 years would have been here instead of just in spirit. And we followed John Watson for years. And also in that piece was a letter from a man whose dad had given him and his two brothers bottles of cognac. And his two brothers drank theirs right away, but he held on to his. And his father always wanted him to have a son. And he and his wife had had a daughter, and then they'd had 10 miscarriages and one stillbirth. And he wrote us this. People trusted us with their lives. They became like family, like extended family and friends. So I called him, and I said, you sent us this letter. May I speak to your wife? Is it all right with her if we print this? Because it's really personal. And he said, yes, it is. And the reason why he wrote to us was he was writing from his study, because that night his wife had had a son. and he was listening to his father's favorite music and crying, and finally opening that cognac. And his wife said, "Oh, yes, please use it." I mean, the level of intimacy that we achieve with readers, the community that we built, that you all are part of. Thank you for being here tonight. This is very special for us. Many of you have told us what the column meant to you personally, and we thank you, really. You were the wind beneath our wings. Thank you very much.
So you describe yourselves, or at least others have described you as wine critics, and yet your personas were, as we've talked about, just regular people who knew something about wine, and then were sharing what you loved and your passion and what you were thinking about. But your columns never showed off. They didn't ring with, "Look how much I know, and so sorry you let me teach you because you don't know as much." And it strikes me that wine criticism as an entity is a little bit different than that. Talk about wine criticism a little bit. Where do you think wine criticism stands today? And you were just a little left of that classic idea of criticism, it seems like.
Well, a good place to start might be in acknowledging that wine consumption has dipped for the first time in 25 years. You know, what is the responsibility of critics in that? We never claimed to have exalted knowledge. We had deep knowledge. And that and passion, I think, were important and are important. But having expertise and saying, "I know it and you don't." John often said that that people who we used to hang out with and who taught us a lot may have thought, "I wouldn't have shown you the secret handshake if you were going to spread it," you know? And why not share something lovely like wine that is accessible to everyone? I'm very proud of our take on it, which was about life, which we all can buy into.
Right.
We were trying to make the pie bigger, and we weren't like that character, "My precious," you know, protecting our little slice of it. We were trying to lift it up and to make it something that everyone could enjoy.
And it just, it's worth noting that there's no one who's more eloquent talking about this very issue than Warren Winiarski, about elevating wine so that everybody can enjoy it and everybody can see it as something that they should enjoy on a regular basis. But we would be remiss for not, in answer to that, to not discuss the role of wine jerks. And I'm not talking about critics, but aside from actual critics, one of the issues, and we think this has something to do with the dip in wine consumption, is that there are just too many people out there who think they are wine experts, who think they are wine critics, and who lord their knowledge over everybody else in the neighborhood. This isn't healthy for wine. This isn't good for wine. It makes wine into a competition instead of something that's fun. And in our case, we used to get letters fairly often from wine jerks, always wanting to point out something that we had wrong. And of course, we were eager to get letters like that because if we had anything wrong, we wanted to correct it. The problem is that almost in every case, it wasn't wrong. Let me give you one actual example. We got a letter from someone, this is just one of many, who said, "You said that this wine was from the Carneros region of Napa. That's not right. I was just there. I happen to know that Carneros is in Sonoma. And so, of course, we wrote back. We explained that it straddles both. We sent a copy of the label. But the thing is, every single one, literally every single one of these letters was from a man. Every one. Until one day, we got a jerk letter from a woman.
And it was so exciting. John printed it out and ran around the office. And it said, you said that meritage rhymes with heritage. And we all know that it's French. It's meritage. Yeah. So we wrote back that, no, actually, it's meritage, and here's the link from the Meritage Association. And then we got an email from the same person, and she said, you know, I left my computer for 5 minutes, and my husband sat down and sent you that mail. He's been a pain in the butt about wine around our neighborhood forever, and maybe this will deflate him a little bit. So still, all men, right?
Do women and men experience wine differently?
Huh.
It's hard for us to know because since we did grow up together in wine and we've been drinking it together for so long that I just don't know the answer to that. I mean, I do know that Dottie experiences it different than I do because of, as she explained, she grew up in a household where they ate fruits and vegetables. I grew up in a Jewish household where they weren't allowed, and so we experience wine different in that way, but in a larger sense, I don't know.
I'm probably quicker to find flaws.
To find flaws in a wine.
Yeah. And over time, with that same bottle, John usually agrees. Mm-hmm. But I'm...
You want to get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, I want to go back to this idea of language for a minute because, wine journalism, this may not be its best moment right now. There are fewer and fewer, in fact, there are only 2 national newspapers that have full-paid wine columnists left, the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, as far as I know.
The Wall Street Journal still.
The Wall Street Journal, full-time?
Uh-huh. Letty Key.
She's full-time
Yep.
at the...
I think so.
I don't know.
I thought she was a freelance person.
Oh, she
actually,
might
for them.
be.
I mean, I think she's a regular columnist, but
Actually, I don't know the fine print.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Pretty sure that's the case. But even if there are 3, we still know that there aren't 30, right? And we also know that talking about wine is hard. You found a way by analogizing to life and to talking about emotion and things that mattered to people. But I wonder if you are essentially optimistic about wine journalism, because you're both also, not only know wine, but you really understand journalism. Are you optimistic about this as a field moving forward?
Wow, we've asked ourselves that. You want to take a whack at it?
Well, I guess the larger question is whether we're optimistic about journalism going forward.
Yeah.
That's
the big question.
That's kind of the big question, and I like to think yes, because I like to think that we're in a difficult age right now where we're between one kind of journalism moving to another kind of journalism, but that when we look back 10 years, 20 years from now, we'll see that it has migrated to something that in itself is quite robust and very important. And so I like to think that wine will be part of that. There are so many people right now who are writing online, Instagram, blogs about wine that are very interesting and very good. There are also many that are not. All of us know that Instagram, you're as likely as not to find wine criticism that really is about cleavage, and it's really distressing and disturbing. But there's also a lot of good stuff out there, and those people are still new at it in a sense, since that kind of journalism is new. So I think we can all hope that that's going to grow into something that's quite robust and really matters.
But when we were writing for the Wall Street Journal, we always brought in to our column other wine people. We interviewed you, we interviewed Jancis. We wanted our readers to know that there were other voices out there. And we still do that with the Grape Collective. We had Mary and Ed just the other week. Tonya Pitts, who's a wine director at a Shishi restaurant.
One Market here in San Francisco.
Yeah, and
Terrific woman.
we didn't want to hold our readers captive to us. We thought that wine was better off if you were exposed to other writers as well. And if people share like that, maybe there's some strength in numbers.
Let's talk about a couple of aspects of wine today real quickly. What's the most underappreciated wine in the world today?
Riesling.
I'm there.
You know, it has been our whole lives. It will be forever. I mean, I think every wine critic and wine writer in the world would answer the same way, because we all love Riesling, and it's like we just can't get people to drink it.
Yeah.
And what's amazing to me is that people still say, "Ooh, Riesling, it's too sweet." But these people weren't even born when Blue Nun was big. I don't even know why they think that.
Their parents told them that. Their grandparents told them.
My gosh.
Yeah.
But Riesling is just a natural wonder of the world.
It is indeed. Yes. So you both agree on that, right?
Yep.
Okay, and what is your wine drinking week like these days? Do you get home, you throw your coat off, and you drink wine every night, or you maybe every other night, or what's it like these days?
We've always had wine every night, except for when I was pregnant or in the hospital for something.
Right.
I mean, it was always on the table. The kids had their sippy cups, and we had wine. We wanted them to understand that it's a part of everyday meals, and best enjoyed with food.
Yeah. Did you do something specifically in thinking about, because your daughters they're out of college now, I think, right? When they were growing up, did you consciously want to teach them about wine? How did you do that?
We dragged them to wine regions. And dragged. They refused to get out of the car at wineries unless the wineries had a pet. So John would keep the car going, and I would run out into the tasting room and say, "Do you have a winery pet?" And many do, because they're farms.
Yeah.
So then the girls would get out of the car. And because we took them to wine country, then they got the vacation they wanted, which was Disney World. And a lot of our colleague wine writers poo-pooed the idea that we would write about wine at Disney World. But at the time that we were, Disney said that it employed more wine professionals than any company in America. So take that, Mickey Mouse, right? I mean,
there was that time. That's right. They had a lot of the original master sommeliers went to work for Disney.
Right.
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 So fascinating.
Right.
Yeah.
And today, when we were writing the column for the Journal, we would have 6 to 10 bottles a night in bags. Now we generally would taste, we might taste 2 or 3 in the night. But the most important moment for us is that we have a house in Westchester County, and it has a wonderful view of the sunset. And whenever we're at our country place, we open up something that we believe will be special, and we open it and we have it with the sunset. And it's a very, very special time to us. And if we don't like that wine under that circumstance, we know it sucks.
Well, speaking of that, are there any kinds of wines you really don't like?
No.
Like categorically, like, don't give me a bottle of that?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Pretty,
I'll try anything once. You know, I think if someone cared enough to bottle this, to grow it and to
Yeah.
bottle it, I'll take a sip. And if it's a BS wine with no soul, a cast off, then I'll ask John to pour it out.
oh, I thought you were going to say, I'll ask John to drink it.
Oh, am I giving off that kind of vibe?
Never mind, okay. So
I love him.
I know. All right, a couple of, one last question, because then we want to take some questions from the audience, from all of you. So for each of you, if you could each answer this separately, although I know it's hard now because you've just been together for so long, but so at this point, what do you consider your greatest achievement?
My kids. My kids.
Okay.
You mean in wine?
Larger achievements work too, so
Yeah.
your children certainly.
I'll answer the wine part. What we wanted to do was to get people excited about having wine as part of their life and become interested in wine enough that they would become lifelong wine lovers and wine drinkers. We've heard from so many people, including some people who were kind enough to be here today, that that's exactly what happened. And in fact, we've heard from some winemakers that they became winemakers because they read our column. In the run-up to this, we got this lovely note from a woman who said that her father used to bring home the Wall Street Journal's wine column to her when she was a kid every week, and that made her decide, I want to become a winemaker. That's just incredibly moving. And so the idea that there are people out there today who are having better lives and passing down that idea that wine is something that can slow you down, make you reconnect with your loved ones, and add romance to your life is something that we're very proud of.
And we second that, don't we? So we have enough time, I think, for a couple of questions, questions up here in the our far left. Hold on one moment, a microphone is coming to you.
You go to your country house and you open a bottle of wine and you're looking at the sunset and you think that this is a fabulous bottle of wine and it, as you put it, it sucks. Do you dump it out or do you continue to drink it?
Depends. If it sucks, we switch to something else with great disappointment. But then we resume watching the sunset and talking.
But when we probably would just dump it out. One of the things that we were taught early on, and that we in turn told people is that if a wine isn't good enough to drink, it's not good enough to cook with. And so there's nothing to be done with that wine. When we wrote our Wall Street Journal column and we tasted 6 to 10 wines a night, at the end of the night, there wasn't anything to do with all of those wines but to pour them down the sink. Now, the truth is, my wife could not watch this. This is absolutely true. She would leave the room while I poured out all of the wine. That has not changed. Even when it's a single bottle that we have to pour out because there's nothing else to be done with it, that's the dirty job that's left to me.
Next question. Let's see, this gentleman right here, down here. Julianne, do you have? Okay, this gentleman right here.
Thank you. My question is this. Dottie, you said a few minutes ago that you try anything, right? I'm wondering whether you've tried two-buck chuck, because today's the day the man just died, Trader Joe, the Joe of Trader Joe.
Oh.
And I'm wondering what you think that two-buck chuck phenomenon has done to the industry, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise.
Interesting question.
Yeah.
Let me say first, we did do a column on two-buck chuck, where we did a two-buck chuck tasting.
We're not too proud to do that.
And because when it was a phenomenon, we really wanted to taste it, but there were no Trader Joe's in New York, and in any case in New York you can't sell wine where you sell food. So I traveled to New Jersey to Trader Joe's to buy the two-buck chucks, and we tasted them, and I don't know, they were kind of okay. Our favorite of them was the Sauvignon Blanc.
I think that's right.
Yeah. And so we definitely tried them. Our sense about wines was that if there's a phenomenon like two-buck chuck that people are drinking, we needed to too, because we needed to find out what it was that they were finding attractive about it.
And in the same way, we actually did a tasting of white Zinfandel, a soldier in Iran.
Iraq.
Her name.
Lakita Joseph.
Lakita Joseph encountered one of our colleagues covering women on the front and told her that she read our column and that she was embarrassed to admit that she fantasized about being at home and having a bubble bath and drinking white Zinfandel because she read our column and thought that she should aspire to something greater. And we thought, thank you for your service, woman. So we went out and bought every white Zinfandel we could find to do a proper tasting. And some of them were on the bottom shelves of wine stores, like pornography, right? I mean, but if people were making good white Zinfandel, they needed support, and some of them were, and because those vines were not ripped out, we can have old vine Zinfandel now. There's everything can be made well, I think.
Absolutely right. There's a question up here. Yes?
Hi. When you did food pairing with 15 bottles in your kitchen, who did the cooking?
Dottie.
Well, often I did, but we had a babysitter who wouldn't leave. And we didn't want her to leave. She was with us from the time Zoe was 1 until Zoe went to college at 18. And so she morphed into our chef at some point. But on weekends, I would cook. But when I met John, he did the cooking.
Okay. And
I wonder how that happened.
and what are your top 3 advice for food pairing? With different kind of
Champagne or
wines.
anything? Beaujolais, Cru Beaujolais and anything? Yeah, muscadet and oysters and half shell.
Okay, 3 good ones. Right here, right here, question.
Hi. You were speaking a little bit before about how much you loved the feel of paper, and I know you went from Wall Street Journal now to a more digital format. I'm curious if you think that this column would have had the same impact if it had been in the digital dominant age, or if you think you've kind of captured a moment in publishing in which people were holding the paper in their hand, sending the article. I mean, my mother still does clippings and sends them in the mail to me, but so the power of print, and if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh, that's a good question.
Very good question.
I can, I mean, I can't answer that, but I can tell you that after we left the Journal, I really wanted to go back to hard news. I missed it. So I went to Bloomberg News, which is entirely digital.
And help them win their first Pulitzer.
And, right, and I was going to get to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, you see what I have to put up with?
I'm sorry, dear.
But what I found is that great journalism, which Bloomberg does, or did when I was there, has impact. It's not the form, it's the quality of the material. We wrote stories when I was at Bloomberg that had tremendous impact, although they were never, ever on paper. So I believe that it's the quality of the story that matters, not how it's presented.
A couple of last questions. This gentleman here. I think there's a microphone coming your way.
Well, thank you for a marvelous evening together. You mentioned Riesling perhaps was the most underappreciated wine that you were aware of, and I've really appreciated some fine Rieslings over the years. Where have you found the best production of Riesling?
Oh, my. Well, I guess Germany was where
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
wait.
Germany is, yeah, Germany, but
we dragged the kids there, too.
yeah, we did, and boy, did they hate that. But you know, Germany is the home of great Riesling. That said, New York State is making some awesome Rieslings. If you haven't had Rieslings from Michigan, you should look for them. They're really hard to find outside of Michigan, but they're doing some fine stuff, and Washington is making some outstanding Rieslings. One of the things about a Riesling from the U.S. is that I think it probably has a better chance of being a good wine than most, because you got to be crazy to make it. You know, who is going to buy it? And yet there are people who are committed to it, who are going to make Riesling, and we've had some outstanding Rieslings from the northern part of the U.S.
And if we want to be globally supportive, the Rieslings of the Clare and Eden Valleys of Australia
Right.
are extraordinary, and they probably could use some support right now.
Right.
Yeah, more questions. John, right here in the front.
We did. The Wall Street Journal paid for every bottle.
So the question is, how did Dottie and John make the selections of the wines that they were going to taste since each night, because they purchased their wines?
From all over the country.
Well, that was kind of my job, so I'll answer that. We would decide that, say, we're going to taste every Merlot. We're going to do Merlot between $20 and $50. U.S. Merlot between $20 and $50. One of the things that we discovered early on in our column is that if I just went out to New York City shops and bought 50 to 60, people would say, well, I can't find those where I am in Michigan or Idaho because you got them all in New York City. So after that, we realized that we needed to buy them from all over the country. And the point wasn't that you could buy any of these wines everywhere, because there's no good wine that you can buy everywhere. But the point was that there are good wines everywhere. that wherever you live, there are good wines. So we would decide we wanted to do Merlot between $20 and $50. Back then, it was a lot harder to get wine shipped. There were fewer places that had online. So basically what we would do is go to Sam's in Chicago, K&L out here.
Also Wally's out here.
Right, Brown Derby in St.
Right.
Louis, places that would ship, and completely anonymously, just buy all of them. Just buy all of them.
Oh, well, that was anonymous.
And,
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
and have them delivered. So that the idea is that they were a completely random selection.
But we actually got a letter from the Attorney General's office once saying, I'm sure you're not having these shipped across state lines where you shouldn't. You know, just sort of right on our chin.
Yeah. No, sir, is the answer to that.
Yeah.
One last question for tonight. This gentleman up here. Oh, I'm sorry. It's very hard to see.
It's hard to see, yeah.
I see you now. Yes, this lady up here, please.
Thank you. I want to echo the thanks for a lovely evening. And I hope this question is a segue. I am dying to see you taste that wine in front of you and talk about it and show us your process.
Gladly. I like your question.
This is the best part about being the interviewer as opposed to the interviewee. You can actually drink your wine while they're answering. This is not a commercial wine, by the way, so it's not sold anywhere. It's made by John Emmerich at Silverado here in Napa Valley. These grapes are occasionally, some of these grapes are sold to winemakers locally, but it's not a commercial wine. I asked UC Davis if we could taste it, in part because we didn't know how difficult you would be as an audience, and we felt that at least we'd be up here ourselves and be able to drink wine. But also, frankly, because I think many people don't realize how extensive a role UC Davis plays in the wine industry, that it goes way beyond just there's a bunch of young people who graduate with a degree in enology and viticulture, and then they become the winemakers around the country. It's an extremely active university, and this is emblematic of all of the extraordinary research that they do and that people rely on. Wineries and wineries around the world rely on this research. So it's not so much an idea of evaluating this wine, the reason that it's here, but it's delicious, don't you think?
It is, it is.
Well, you mean the process of tasting it?
And the conversation that you had.
Oh, well, you know,
With all these people in front of us. This is the way we do it all the time.
To some extent, we start the way anybody else would. When we look at a wine, is it pretty? I mean, I think all of you know this, that it's amazing how much prettier some wines are than others. There's some wines that just seem to glisten. They just seem to be filled with diamonds. And you look at them and you say, I'm going to like that wine because it's just so pretty. And that's just the simplest thing in the world. And then we smell it, and the very first thing is, does it smell good or not? It really, really basic stuff. I mean, we just start with like basic stuff that anybody would. And then after that, it's kind of off to the races, where with this wine, for instance, I would probably say to Dottie, it's really interesting because it's got some real earthiness to it that's very attractive.
Yeah, there's great minerality, there's cherries, my fruits, but but it's earthy, and it's pretty tannic. This is 2012. We had the 13 yesterday.
It has nice acidity, and we kind of go from there. But when we taste a wine that we're going to write about, or that we possibly might write about, we give it lots of time. We give it every possibility to show its stuff. We taste it over a long period of time, with food, without food, because as all of you know, wines change. And something that we sometimes like when we first open it, after a half hour, an hour, just seems to dissipate. And then at the end, the last common sense thing, plain old common sense, is this the kind of wine I would have a glass of and want a second? Simplest thing in the world, all common sense.
This makes me want to eat. You know, it's...
Which is just the most perfect segue, because it is, in fact, dinner time, I think, for everyone. So, again, everyone, thank you for being here, and would you join me in thanking Gaiter and John?
Thank you.
It is my unfortunate duty to draw this close, and I want to start by thanking Karen, John, and Dorothy again for the most interesting and entertaining hour I've spent in quite a while. Thank you very much. I also need to give a very quick shout out to the staff and students of the UC Davis Library for making this all possible. And let me end by just thanking all of you for making the trip here, coming out to see these amazing people, and I hope we'll see you all again soon. Have a great evening.